Well, I mentioned earlier that we're going to be thinking about the 10 rules or commandments that God gave to his people back thousands of years ago over the next few weeks. And we're going to read a section now from the book of Hebrews that helps set the scene for us. And Andy's going to come and read that for us.
Good morning. So we're reading from Hebrews chapter 12. If you've got one of the church Bibles, it's on page 1333. 1333. And we're reading from verse 18, so the final column there on the right-hand side. You have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, "I am trembling with fear." But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, "Once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens." The words "once more" indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful, and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. For our God is a consuming fire.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning. Well, I've got a picture for us on the screen. I wonder what you'd say was happening here. It looks very like something suspicious, maybe something worrying. It looks a bit like he's trying to take her bag. But if we zoom out and see a bit more of the picture, and I think we can do that now, you see that actually he's not a robber. He's not stealing her bag, but he's actually saving her from stepping out in front of that truck. Context is everything, and sometimes when we only see a small part of something, we don't understand the context, we make mistakes. I wonder if you've ever felt misunderstood because something you said was taken out of context. Or sometimes that can happen deliberately. People deliberately misunderstand what's been said. Well, we're about to embark on this series of talks over the summer looking at the Ten Commandments, as has already been mentioned. And it's one of the best known bits of the Bible, but at the same time, perhaps one of the most misunderstood. I say that the Ten Commandments are well known. That has been my experience in my life, although I think that might be changing these days. But for most of my life, it's been common to meet people who would say this to me, and I've met numerous people who've said this or something like this. I don't go to church, but I try and live by the Ten Commandments. It's my kind of rule that I live by, the Ten Commandments. We've got a ruler, I think, on the screen. It's kind of my rule that I live by these 10 things. I wonder if anyone's ever said that to you. As I say, it's perhaps becoming less common, but for much of my life, seems to have been more common. It'd be an interesting thing to ask somebody who says that and try and live by the Ten Commandments, which one's your favourite? I wonder what they'd say. Or if you want to put them even more on the spot, Ten Commandments, can you tell me what they are? I wonder if they'd be able to do that. But of course, for us to know whether or not they could do that, we'd need to know them. So I wonder if any one of us here was on the spot, brought up to the front, put on the spot like Andrew was, and asked what are all of the Ten Commandments. I wonder how many you get. I wonder how many I get. So that's why I say they're kind of well known, but are they? And they're kind of well known, but I think often misunderstood. And one of the ways that they're misunderstood is all to do with the context that they come in. I've got three things that I particularly want us to think about this morning. The first of those is why context is everything. So we've already seen that picture of the robber, and it turns out he's not a robber, he's rescuing the lady from the truck. Often just having a bit more context helps us understand what's going on. Look at this picture. I don't know what's going on there. What's happening? Is it just falling off the ceiling? I don't know. I don't know what's going on. We need a bit more context to know what's going on. And sometimes just a bit more context is so helpful in understanding something. And so, as I've said, I think the Ten Commandments are partly misunderstood because people don't put them in their correct context. The Ten Commandments are found in Exodus chapter 20. And you don't have to be a genius to work out that the context for Exodus chapter 20 is Exodus chapter 19. And that sets up what is happening as the Ten Commandments are given. So we've already had our reading from Hebrews, and you might want to keep a finger, or if you're using one of the church Bibles, there's them string bits you can leave in there, because we will come back to that in a little while. But we're going to go over and look at Exodus chapter 19 and the context of the Ten Commandments. If you're using one of the church Bibles, I think it's on page 82 of the church Bibles. I'm just going to read for us the first 9 verses of Exodus 19 to help us with this context. Exodus 19 verse 1 says, "On the first day of the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, 'This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites.' So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, 'We will do everything the Lord has said.' So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, 'I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud, so the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you.' Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said." Well, the context of the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20, is Exodus 19. And the context is that these are rescued people. They've just weeks earlier been rescued from slavery in Egypt. And verse 4 tells us that God has defeated their Egyptian slave masters. And it's described in a lovely way in verse 4 that God has swooped down like some giant eagle and scooped them up and rescued them and brought them actually to himself. It's an idea and an image that's been used in film and literature down the years because it's such a powerful image of an eagle swooping in and rescuing. Verse 5 tells us that they are a treasured possession for God, or they can be. Out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Now, I don't know if you have much treasure at home. Maybe you've got something buried in the back garden. I don't know. Maybe it's just potatoes. But I wonder if you've got some treasure. There are some people who have a lot of treasure. If you visit the Tower of London, you can see the crown jewels, can't you? The treasure of the nation. Does it belong to us or the Queen? I'm not sure. But there's all that treasure there. And the Queen is, of course, very wealthy. She has palaces and owns all kinds of stuff. One of the most wealthy individuals in the world, I would think. And yet even the Queen, with all that treasure, all that wealth, she will have some things that are particularly treasured, won't she? Treasured possessions. Might even be a photo or some small gift that was given to her by a loved one or something. The sort of things that if there was a fire, she would go and try and rescue from the drawer and take with her. All that wealth, and yet within that, a treasured possession. But do you see what's being said here about God? God who made the universe, God who has far more than the Queen, that these people can be his treasured possession within the wealth, a treasured possession. So that's the first part of understanding the context of these 10 commandments, is that they come in the context of rescue. The second is that they come in the context of this offer of covenant. A covenant is an agreement or a really solemn kind of promise between two parties. And there's a covenant on offer here from God to the people. They've been rescued, and then he says, you can be my people, you can be my treasured possession, you can be my nation, you can be my representative kingdom to the other kingdoms of the world. Do you see what he said in verse 6? You will be, for me, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. If other nations want to look and see what is it like to follow the God of heaven, they can look to you. You'll be like a tremendous advert for me to other nations. That's what's on offer to the people. It's not being forced on them, though. They agree to it. The people's answer comes back via Moses. Verse 8. The people respond together, we'll do everything the Lord has said. So it's very important to see here, because this is setting up the context for these 10 commandments. And it's very important to see the order that things are happening. Now, I love this picture of a horse. There we go. It's not a usual way to fasten a horse to a cart, is it? They've put the cart before the horse instead of the horse before the cart. So you don't often see horses pushing carts like that. I think it's because of the problem with steering, I guess. I don't know. Maybe they can pull a bit better than they can push as well. But it's not the right way, is it? It doesn't actually work, I don't think. Not that I'm a big expert on horses, but you never see it, so it obviously doesn't work. It just doesn't work that way round. There's even an expression, putting the cart before the horse. God hasn't said to the people, look, if you perform, if I give you these 10 rules and you can keep them all, then I'll come and rescue you from Egypt. Then you can be my people. That's not as good at all. Having it the other way around is not as good. It actually doesn't work. If God had said, you've got to earn this, you've got to earn the rescue, you've got to earn the right to be my people, it wouldn't work. Why wouldn't it work? Because we'd mess it up. We wouldn't be able to do it. They'd still be in Egypt. But that's not what God said, is it? God has already rescued them. He's offering them to be his people. And then, that's the context, then he tells them, well, being my people means you want to live this way. And that's why context is everything when it comes to the Ten Commandments. Because the Ten Commandments are given after the rescue, not in order to secure the rescue. The Ten Commandments are given as a way for them to represent God and his better way of living to a watching world. They're not given as a way to earn his rescue or reward. So that's the first important thing I want us to see about these Ten Commandments. Context. The context they come in is everything. Second thing for us to see is assumption can be deadly. Assuming something can be deadly. Now, I used to work as an electrician, and one of the things you learn as an electrician is you must never assume that the power is off when you start working on it, touching wires. You always test and check that it is off. Now, these guys are working on high voltage stuff. It's not what I used to work on. But it's an absolute mess of wires and all sorts there, isn't it, that they're working on. And you'd be absolutely foolish to go anywhere near that if you were unsure whether or not it had been switched off, wouldn't you? It can be dangerous to just make assumptions, actually deadly to make assumptions. And the same is true here. If we went on and read the rest of chapter 19, and we'll read a little bit of it now, we would see that God gives them all kinds of instructions about what's going to happen at this mountain. They're gathered at the foot of the mountain. What's going to happen because he's going to come and meet with Moses. We're going to break into the action again at verse 20. So if you've still got Exodus 19 in front of you, verse 20 says this: "The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, 'Go down and warn the people, so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them.' Moses said to the Lord, 'The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy.' The Lord replied, 'Go down and bring Aaron up with you. But the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them.'" It is dangerous to approach God. He's put these limits, he's warned them, put these limits around the mountain. We didn't read it, but in verse 16, the top of the mountain's got cloud and thunder and lightning and all sorts going on. You sort of think nobody would want to approach that. It sounds really scary. Moses is being called up there, and when Moses gets there, God just tells him, "Go right back down again." It's probably Moses thinks, "Just come up," but go back down and warn them. And Moses says, "We've already warned them. We've we've told them not to approach the mountain." But God says it's really important. They must not approach in a way that I haven't said they can approach. Moses is allowed to approach. God set out how it can happen, but everyone else can't just wander up the mountain to have a look. They mustn't approach. Even the priests in verse 24 are warned they can't come either. To approach God in the wrong way can be deadly. But that's what people do today. I don't mean we get on a jet and fly to Egypt and visit Mount Sinai. In fact, you're probably not even allowed to do that. It's probably a red zone or something, isn't it? But I don't mean we do that. But people try and approach God in the wrong way. Now, do you remember what I said earlier? I've met numerous people in my life who've said, "I try to live by the Ten Commandments. I try to live by the Ten Commandments. I don't go to church, but I try to live by the Ten Commandments." Now, what's behind that? Well, there could be various things behind that. They might just want to communicate, I'm a good person like you. I also try and, not steal or something. But I think for some people are thinking, I'll be okay, because although I don't go to church, I don't read my Bible, I don't pray, don't do any of the other things that are considered normal Christian behavior, I will be okay with God because I've tried to live by the Ten Commandments, which God has said is how we should live. So I'll be okay. Now, as I've said, they may not know what all the Ten Commandments are anyway. They might just have this imagined idea of what they are. So that's the first problem with that. But the big problem with it is you're approaching God in the way you've decided. Now, it is good if people don't lie or steal or murder or covet their neighbour's ox. It is actually an attractive way to live, isn't it? It's a good way for society to operate. These things are obviously good things. I mean, it's particularly a good thing if you've got an absolutely gorgeous ox. It's great your neighbour doesn't covet it and want to steal it, isn't it? Do you mean? Or it's great that the Ten Commandments say people can't just come into your house and take your stuff. Or that when you're speaking to somebody, they ought to tell you the truth and not lie to you. Or that in the street someone can't just stab you and murder you. They're obviously good things that God says. But there's an assumption sometimes being made by some people, I think, if I keep the Ten Commandments, that will mean that eventually I'll get access to God. I'll be able to spend eternity with him. God will say, that's okay. But it's a dangerous assumption. It's a dangerous assumption to think we can access God in the way we've decided, or in a way we've misunderstood perhaps. Because it's not how he said we can approach him. It's not how he said that we can be acceptable in his sight. Well, what has he said? Well, that's where our section that was read to us from Hebrews 12 is really useful. And it links very closely to Exodus 19 that we've just been looking at. Now, some people think the book of Hebrews is a very early Christian sermon. Some of the other writing in the New Testament are very obviously letters written to churches, and it might be that, but it could be a very early Christian sermon. And if that's the case, or even if it's a letter, chapter 12 is really getting to the high point of the arguments that have been made along the way. It's really kind of driving home some conclusions. And then chapter 13, the next chapter, which is actually the final chapter, brings out some of the implications about how to live in the light of all that's gone before. But if we look at Hebrews 12 and verse 18, we see it's picking up Exodus 19. It starts by saying, you have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom and storm. It's referring to that Exodus 19 experience when they came to the mountain that was just like that. It's saying you haven't done that. If you're a Christian, you haven't experienced that. That's not been your experience. So what is the Christian experience? Well, verse 22 spells it out, and I'll just read this again for us. Verse 22, but you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all, to the Spirit of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. We have come to Jesus, the one who has made a new covenant possible. Do you remember they entered into a covenant in Exodus 19 with God? A new covenant is now possible, and it's possible because of Jesus. So just as they had the context of rescue from Egypt for the Ten Commandments, Christian people have the context of rescue from slavery, not in Egypt, but slavery to sin, the New Testament says. And just as they came to a covenant agreement relationship with God, Christians have come to a new covenant, a new agreement, a new way of being God's people, and it's been secured for us by Jesus, by his death and resurrection. So, just to draw some of these threads together, just as it was dangerous for them to approach God in the wrong way, it's absolutely underlined time and time again in chapter 19. You must not. It's super dangerous. It's like working on this with the power on. You must not do it. Just like that's dangerous, it would be wrong, it would be even dangerous for us to assume that we can be right with God in a way that's different from how he said we can be right with him. And what has he said? Has he said keep the Ten Commandments? Well, actually, he said trust Jesus, trust in his death and resurrection, and then you can be part of my family. So what part do the Ten Commandments play? We'll get to that in a moment. So, that was the second thing then. Assumptions can be deadly. There's a third thing I want us to see, and our time is slipping away, so I'm going to try and speed up. And the third thing is this, and it's why it's thinking about why grateful is better than guiltful, or being full of guilt, but it just fitted better that way around. Why grateful is better than guiltful. Now, back in Exodus 19, the Ten Commandments are given, and the people enter into this covenant relationship in a grateful response to the rescue that's just happened, and to this tremendous privilege that's been offered to them of being God's treasured possession, of being his representative nation. And the Ten Commandments are given then to help them to know how to live as God's people. And really, it's the same for us as Christians. Back in Hebrews 12, just at the very end of our reading, it said this, verse 28, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. So let us be thankful and worship God with reverence and awe. And when it talks about worshiping God here, it's not just talking about Sundays, it's not just talking about something that happens in a building like this, but it's calling them to a whole life response. Actually, chapter 13, if you went on and read that, spells out some of what that will look like in their whole life response. But it's encapsulated in a great verse from Romans 12, which I'll just pop on the screen for us. I love what Romans 12 says, where it says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, speaking to Christians, in view of God's mercy, because of the rescue, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. It's a whole life thing. In case we're unsure what that means, verse 2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So living out the Ten Commandments is a grateful response to what Jesus has done for us. So as Christians, we know we've been rescued by what Jesus achieved on the cross. We're trusting in Jesus. And living out the Ten Commandments and other things that the Bible says about how to live as God's people comes as a grateful response to that. Not a guilt-driven attempt to be good enough. It's that cart and horse thing again. You've got to get it the right way around. It's a grateful response to what Jesus has done, not a guilt-driven attempt to be good enough. And this actually sets Christianity apart from Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, other attempts at empty religiosity that people sometimes attempt. Other faiths generally say do. They generally say do this. Often they have things that are very similar to the Ten Commandments, actually. But they often say do this, and you could be okay. But Jesus doesn't say do. Jesus says it's been done. It's what he's done. And then we can live in grateful and thankful response to that. We can be part of God's family because of what Jesus has done for us. Now, I wonder if that's news to you. I wonder if you've thought about the Ten Commandments and what the Bible says about how to live in that way before. If this is completely new to you and you're thinking, I want to find out more about this, what Jesus has done for me, for us, please do speak to somebody. Speak to me, one of the other leaders here at the church. Maybe a friend's brought you along, or you're watching with a friend at home. Or if you're watching and you don't know anyone from church, why not email the church if you'd like to find out more about that. But I guess quite a few of us are Christians. We have thought about this before, that there are a couple of implications of this for us, I think. One is that we'll want to show the family likeness. As part of God's family, we want to show the family likeness. We want to show what it means to live for him and to live in the way that he wants us to. Do you remember they were described as a kingdom of priests and an advert really to other nations of what it meant to be God's people. And we, and I'm speaking now to Christians, we are that to our nation. One of the very few silver linings of lockdown has been live streaming and being able to put more video content out for the world. It's allowed some people maybe who have never been to the church building to see what's going on and what we're saying and what's happening. As things unlock, as it's easier for people to come, we want to continue to be a great advert for what it means to follow Jesus. We, of course, want to proceed sensibly and cautiously and protecting vulnerable people. But in what we do on Sundays and in the rest of the week as well, we want to be living lives that people can see. As people see us caring for our neighbour, as people see how we may be a bit different at work, as people see what it looks like to be a community that looks out for one another and cares for one another. But all this is done in grateful response to what God has done for us. It's not done out of guilt or in a fearful attempt to earn God's favour. Well, let's try and put that in practice, keep that in mind, and we're going to need help, God's help to do that, aren't we? Because it doesn't always come naturally. So let me pray now that God would help us to do that. Father, we thank you that you have given us so much advice and information about how to live as your people. But that's all in response to what you have first done for us. In response to the rescue that Jesus achieved at the cross. Father, I pray that you would help us to be your people, to live in the way that you want. Father, we know that these things are attractive to a watching world. People do want people who are truthful and honest and trustworthy. But there's so much more to what being your people means, and we are aware that we sometimes fall short of your standards. Father, I pray that you'd help us to be your people, individually and as a church. But Father, I pray that you'd always help us to get that the right way round and to understand how we're doing that in response to what you have done for us. Amen.